All right, so let's continue our discussion. Okay, just please keep those questions in mind. Like I said, so there are two good questions, right? So why there was no market for the kidney in that particular case? And secondly, but certainly the second question, the first question, they are closely linked with each other. Like second question is, so if we open that market, what would be the cost and what would be the benefit, right? And toward the end, so the decision on legalize or illegalize the market hinge on the trade-offs, right? So the cost versus benefit. If the cost exceed the benefit, and then we must illegalize. If the benefit exceed the cost, and then so we better legalize, right? Think about that, and so we may talk about that next class. All right. So feel free to share your thoughts with me either on chat or send me by email. Right. So now let's back to supply. Okay. So toward the end of the first block, so we said we are going to look at factors cause the supply to shift. Right. So there are 5 factors. Let me go one by one. Start with input price. Okay. So certainly the input price can increase or decrease. Now let's use a decrease in input price to understand how would that affect supply. Okay. Now, just give you an example. Okay. So on safe example, so the corn price decrease. Okay. And then, so how would that affect the supply of chips, like corn chips, right? And so certainly because the price of corns matters to the profit of producing corn chips, right? Why? Is because the corn is the main input for corn chips, and the decrease in the price for corns, that's going to lead to a reduce in the cost of producing corn chips, right? And then, so that's going to increase the profit of producing corn chips, okay? And so that's going to encourage more supply. But here, I want to remind you a principle we discussed earlier in the class, which is ceteris paribus, meaning everything else holding constant. And here, so we only look at the impact of changing price of input, and we hold everything else constant. Like, say, for example, people's tests, people's expectation, people's income, so on and so forth, right? So we only look at that, right? And then certainly this is going to work through change their profit, and then so that's going to affect their willingness and ability to supply, right? Okay. Now there's another example. What will happen to the number of new businesses if the government reduces the fee and red tape associated with new business license? What happens if the fee rises? Okay. So here, the key things is understand what does the fee and red tape means. Okay. The other things we need to understand is, so what market we are talking about? Actually here, we are talking about market of new business. Right? So there's business creation or supply of new business. And then the fee and the red tape associated with new business license is considered a cost of supplying new business. So now if the cost decrease, that's going to lead to a supply increase. On the other hand, if the fee rise, cost increase, and then the supply will decrease, right? Okay. Another example, when the price of cotton drops, the supply of blue jeans will increase, right? Because cotton is considered the main input for blue jeans. Again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, so here we apply this ceteris paribus principle. But in reality, when the price of cotton drops, so at the same time, the people's taste regarding to blue jeans may change as well, right? So in that sense, so we must isolate other factors that can possibly affect supply, so that we can understand how changes in input price affect the supply of a particular goods. Right? Just keep that in mind. Now, the second factor is change in the price of related goods. In the first part, we look at price of input. Now we look at price of related goods. And then similar to the discussion of demand, and particularly in demand, we also look at how the change in the price of related goods will affect the demand. Okay, I apologize, I misspoke. So I'm saying, so when we look at demand or change in demand, we look at how the changes in the price of related goods and service may affect the demand, right? And then there we differentiate between substitutes and the complement. And similarly, here we also differentiate between substitutes and the complement. But the substitute and the complement in production process is slightly different from the substitute and complement in demand, right? So here, when we say goods are substitutes in production, meaning so you can either produce A or you produce B. But when we look at demand, substitute means so you can either consume A or B, right? Okay. Now, here, give you an example of a substitute in production. If you're a farmer, you own a piece of land. I think about in Nebraska. What you can grow? So you can either grow corn or you can grow soybean. If we move to the south, and maybe you can grow cottons, but probably not in Nebraska, right? And then in the sense for a Nebraska Nebraska farm owners, so corn and the soybeans, they are substitute in production, right? And so now we need to understand what would happen if the price for corn increase. How would that affect the supply of soybean? Right? And then so here, really matters is the opportunity cost. Now, what's the opportunity cost here? So the price of corn increase. Okay, so we are producing soybeans. At this moment, the more soybean we produce, and then less corn we can grow. But the corn you cannot grow out of your farmland. Okay, so that's the opportunity cost, because you are forgiving those opportunities. You are let those opportunity to forgo, right? Because you are growing soybean, and then you cannot grow corn. But as the price of corn increase, meaning so the opportunity cost of growing soybean will increase. Now, what are you going to do as a farm owner? And then so you must reduce the soybean production, because the cost of producing soybean becomes higher and higher because you are losing the opportunity of growing corn, which brings you higher profit. All right. So this is how substitute in production affects the supply. Okay. Now let's look at complements. Okay. What is complements in production? Meaning, so when you produce A, you are automatically produce B. This is the easiest way to understand that. Here example. So in pork processing, you're going to produce lard, right? So this is just automatically produced, right? So they're complements. Now, if the price for pork increase, how would that affect the supply of lard? Okay, so the price of pork increase, that's going to increase the supply of pork because of low supply. Now the supply of pork increase because pork and lard, they are complement, and then so automatically you will increase your supply of lard. Right. So this is how the price of related goods affects the supply. Right. So the key thing here is that we must differentiate between substitute and the complement. Right. Now we move to the third factor, change in technology. Right. So technology plays essential role in production. Remember when we study PBF, we say there are a few things, or there are several key factors that determines our production possibility. So this includes land, labor, right? Physical capital, human capital, right? And technology. But actually, so the human capital has technology embedded inside, right? Because technology improve the efficiency, improve the way how we produce. Okay, so once we understand those key factors affect production possibility, now we can understand how the technology change will affect supply. Okay, so if there's a better technology, so that's going to make the seller more willingness to offer at a given price. Why? Because given the price, now with better technology, so they are able to produce at lower cost, or they can produce a higher quantity, right? So that's going to increase their incentive to supply. Okay, largely because the better technology improves the efficiency, improve their profitability. Right. To summarize, a technological innovation lowers costs and increases supply, okay, through affect their profitability. And there are plenty of examples in history, like in this background picture, right? So this automation in farming sectors improve the supply of agricultural product, right? And then, so the technology progress in electronics improve the supply, right? So TV becomes widely available, right? And getting cheaper and cheaper. Right. The next factor, which is the fourth factor, so that can affect supply, which is a change in expectation. Okay. But here, so this is expectation. This is expectation of supply, slightly different from demand. Let me first explain to you how changing expectation of price affects supply, and then I'm going to remind you how would that affect demand. Okay. the expectation of a higher price for a good in the future will decrease current supply. Why is that? It's because the supplier or producer, they understand the higher price in the future is going to bring them higher profit in the future. And then it's better to hold on to supply. Okay, so I'm going to sell my products in the future at a higher price. So that's going to bring me higher profit. Right? And then so this expectation of higher price will lead to an increase in supply in the future, but a decrease in supply in current period. Right? Like, say, for example, if you want to buy Christmas stuff right now, and you will find there's very little supply. Why is that? Because the producer understand the price of Christmas stuff will be higher during Christmas season, because right now there's no demand or very low demand. Price is going to be low, so then they're not willing to put them on their shelves, okay, or they are not willing to supply as a price as in the current period. Right. So here is further explanation. Sellers will adjust their current offering in anticipation of the direction of future price in order to obtain the highest possible prices. So that is going to imply highest possible profit, right? So essentially, the seller is going to behave on their best interest, which is to maximize profit. Now, just remind you what happens from the demand side. If the consumer expect the price will be higher in the future for goods, what they're going to do, most likely they're going to buy a bunch for today, right? So they can avoid to pay higher price in the future. To avoid the cost they may have to pay in the future, right? So this is exactly opposite to what the supply side will do. Okay. All right. The other possible change in expectation, besides change in price, there could be changes in profitability. So this profitability can affect by like technology, or can affect by the government policy, right? Like in this background picture, right? So the windmill production increase as producer expects sales and profitability to increase. What causes sales or the profitability to increase? It could be the price, as we just saw, or it could be better technology, right? So they're expecting, so we are going to have some technology breakthrough. So that's going to make the production of windmill more efficiently and cheaper. Or so the firms expect the government will have some incentives, tax credit. Why would the government do that? It's because the government has a goal to reach climate change goal, right? So to reduce carbon dioxide emission, right? Or to make sure we have green renewable energy, right? So then the government may want to offer you some incentives, tax credit, okay? And then the supply side or the producer will adjust the production, or we will adjust the supply accordingly. Okay, so this is a third factor. And just another examples how changes in expectation can affect the supply. Okay. So this is in 2017, but certainly, so we can change this picture to face mask in 2020, right? There is a sudden demand for face masks, or back in 2017, there's sudden taste shift or sudden popularity of Fiji spinners, right? Similar story, right? But so these just caught the supplier, particularly big retailers, off guard. Okay, why is that? It's because those big retailers, they plan the inventory or to plan the supply ahead of time so that they have enough supply to meet the demand. At some point, they may plan as much as 18 months ahead of peak seasons, such as summer travel or Christmas. But now, this sudden popularity of fidget spinner, or like in 2020, the sudden need for face masks, just really caught those big retailers off guard because they just could not come up with capacity to supply the huge amount to provide the supply and meet the huge demand from the consumer. Right. Okay. So now the last factor can affect supply is change in number of the producers. But certainly, the more people jumps in this market. So, for example, like in 2020, so the face masks, right? So there are so many firms and decide to produce face masks, or there are so many business decide to produce ventilators, right? And then so the supply will increase. Okay. So let's just pause for a few minutes, and then so we continue our discussion toward this last part.